There's something about being on the land, in the woods, and I can only express what my experience was, but it's almost a sense of like being home.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Soulful Impact podcast, where we explore a path to impact and success with a whole new level of fulfillment and freedom. I'm your host, Brooks Barron, and my guest on today's episode is Steve Schlafman.
It just occurred to me I had always been living in the future. There's that old story, like Mr. Duffy lived, three feet from his body? And that was me. I was always living in front of my body. And that was the first time where I knew I had to slow down. It was like this instinctual, hit. It was like this intuitive hit of like, this is what I'm called to go do. And so the last 10 years since that moment has just been a series of decelerations.
Steve is the founder of Downshift, the world's first decelerator for high performers, helping them slow down in times of transition. Previously, Steve was a successful partner at a New York venture capital firm, but was forced to slow down himself due to the unsustainability of his own lifestyle. He's now been on a deep 10-year healing journey, and having fell in love with the medicine of slowness, is now sharing that with the world.
Speed or moving fast isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like what we like to say at Downshift is like, how can we upshift consciously from a place of intention? But if I got the question, I think there's a lot of reasons why it's become really hard to slow down in our culture.
Downshift is an incredibly exciting company that has already attracted a world-class team and a large following within its first year, completed 2 full successful cohorts, and I believe is poised to be a paradigm-shifting company in terms of how we think about and approach our careers. In my opinion, Downshift stands to create a far greater level of impact and success than the Steve of 10 years ago could probably ever imagine. And that's precisely because of the consciousness and soul-rootedness with which Steve and his team are building it.
Like inevitably, when you connect to self, you're gonna hit some things that they might scare you, or you might be ashamed of, or what have you. For me, like in my own journey with meditation, the first thing I had to confront was my addiction.
Steve and I discussed the difference between what we see as the old, still dominant, but outdated model of entrepreneurship and success, aka move fast and break things, and the new paradigm that we see emerging, which is much more rooted in an expanded consciousness, a soul-connected place, and therefore creates sustainable, lasting success and life-enhancing outcomes for all.
Like once I got to the other side of sobriety, starting to go to AA meetings and I'm just like clean myself up, as Ken Wilber would say. It's not like it got easier.
We also dig into a myriad of juicy other topics, including fatherhood, lessons learned from Steve's personal healing journey, his recent dive into nature-based soul initiation work, and the unique and profound value that work has brought him across all dimensions of his life.
I began to realize that, I want to be a great dad and that's present, not because of what I didn't have, but because I love my kids. And they deserve to have a father that's around and that's present and loving and affectionate and all those beautiful things. And so for me, I'm very lucky that I have a life that gives me a lot of flexibility.
Please enjoy. And remember, if you feel ready to unlock your soul's true calling and the vastness of your own soulful impact, then I'd love to hear from you. Check out our offerings and reach out anytime at soulfulimpact.co. Schlaf, so good to see you, my friend.
What's up? It's really great to see you.
Welcome to the Soulful Impact podcast.
Thank you. It's a long time coming. I have such a huge smile on my face. Just every time we connect, it feels like 2 old brothers getting a chance to just share time and space together. And so here we are.
Thank you so much, my friend. I couldn't agree more. Been really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah.
So, to get started, I think the question I wanna start out with here today is I wanna invite you to just share from the heart. Tell us about the wisdom of slowing down.
Mm. I always think it's fun to start with childhood because if you really knew me as a child, you would know that I had one speed and it was go. I was incredibly poorly behaved, like like really, really bad, and my
Really?
mother would say that I had the
Naughty boy.
spolkies. Yes, naughty boy. But the spolkies is a Yiddish term for basically someone that can't really sit still, and so for most of my life, it had just been, um, just m forward motion, progress. Then I hit my teen years, and that turned into achievement-oriented pursuits. And about 10 years ago, I was on vacation in France for my brother-in-law's wedding, and I got served an ad for the Power of Now, and it just completely knocked me on my ass. And it just occurred to me I had always been living in the future. There's that old story, like Mr. Duffy lived what 3 feet from his body, and that was me. I was always living in front of my body. And that was the first time where I knew I had to slow down. I just it was like this instinctual, like, hit. It was like this intuitive hit of, like, this is what I'm called to go do, and so the last 10 years since that moment has just been a series of decelerations. First, it was with my meditation practice, then it eventually became quitting my job as a VC. And now that deceleration has been finding tremendous amount of balance in my life as an entrepreneur, as a coach, and most importantly, as a dad. And I'd say even more importantly than that, like a member of the Earth community and like a member of the world. And so the importance of slowing down to me is really to get to the crux of it. It's really about connecting. It's connecting to self, connecting to others, and then connecting to this source, whatever you want to call it. And to me, that's the power of slowing down is it allows you to connect on those three vectors. And there's just so much intelligence when you're able to do that.
Beautifully said. Wow, you just dropped us right in.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you. And now you're sharing the power of slowing down with others
I
as your
am.
full-time gig.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
So about, geez, now it's almost 12 months ago, but earlier this year, January 6th, it was about 6:30 in the morning and the sun was rising through my backyard. I was standing at the sink. As Thich Nhat Hanh said, like this idea of doing the dishes and fully being immersed in the dishes. And I just look up to the window and I just had this almost this like download of like, but it came in the form of an inquiry, which was this. It was in the world that we come from, there are all these accelerators for talent and companies and creators and
All
careers. And
about
there's like
faster, faster, faster
faster
all the
and
time.
exactly. And for me, the question just like hit, which was like, why don't we have any decelerators?
Mhm.
And then that was
Boom.
literally yeah, and as soon as as soon as I had heard that question, like, in my psyche or arise from my soul, I think is a better way to say it, I knew it was profound, and so the next morning, I'm standing at pretty much the same spot, but I wasn't, like, ruminating in between. The next day, I was sitting in the same spot, and maybe, like, in the morning, the kids are playing in the living room, and I just said, "Oh, it should be called downshift." And I went online. I had no idea what it meant, but I went online, and I go on GoDaddy.com, and there were a bunch of downshift domains available. So I'm like, okay, I'm just going to snag these. I then went to the patent and trademark office and I
Huh.
searched downshift and there was
Huh.
nothing. There was nothing.
Wow.
And I
Wow.
was just like, okay, this is a sign. And I just got started. And so what Downshift is a coaching company that specializes in working with senior leaders. Like what we like to say is senior leaders and entrepreneurs, high performers, high performing individuals to ultimately help them slow down to just in these like really important moments in their careers and lives and help them connect to that which matters most to them and what's ultimately calling to them.
It's such a beautiful offering. It's been so awesome for me to watch it emerge through you this year and watch it take off, really. I mean, you have a team now, just completed your second cohort.
I know we've
It's
had
been
two full cohorts. Yeah, we've been
yeah,
very lucky.
yeah. Well, you're hitting a real need, obviously,
Yeah,
as
yeah,
also evidenced by all the domains available. And yeah, like, because nobody has been really doing this
yeah,
in a big
yeah,
way. And now you're really bringing it. And it's just so, yeah, as I've told you before, it's been so
yeah.
inspiring to watch.
The thing that's amazing, I was actually meeting this morning with an entrepreneur friend who lives out on the West Coast, and he happened to be visiting the area, and I keep on using this, but I don't even view it as a company yet. It really feels like just like a seed, like very fragile. And so internally, I even said this where it's like it's a container for emergence and it's just like rather than like trying to come up with all these big grand plans, it's like how do we stay connected to those that we're supporting and really the problem and opportunity that we see and then just kind of like let it unfold every month, every few months and just then take the next step and the next step.
Yeah. Wow. Well, if that's not what slowness integrated into entrepreneurship looks like, I don't know what would
Yeah.
be.
Yeah, and we're taking a lot of inspiration because there's not a lot of role models for us. We take a lot of inspiration from Jason Fried and the team at 37 Signals. And so we've been and I've asked the team to and I've curated a lot of materials of his and we're educating ourselves on what would it look like to really build as Fried would say a calm culture, like a calm company. And I think it's only possible when we stay really focused and have a very long-term view without being attached to the long term, if that makes sense.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, well, and I think it comes back for me to what you spoke to earlier in regards to your own journey and that first question I asked about the wisdom of slowing down and that piece about connectedness. Like the wisdom of slowing down is to help us actually stay connected to ourselves, connected to source, spirit, life, the universe, connected to the earth and the earth community, connected to our other human fellow travelers, our families, etc. Because that's the first thing that we lose, right? When we get all sped up, we get disconnected. And that's an interesting transition back to maybe talking a little more about your personal journey because I was curious about that, the way that you described yourself as a kid who what was the word your mom is? Smitchels?
The Spolkies.
The
The
Spolkies.
Spolk yeah,
The
the
Spolky.
Spolkies.
Spolkies.
Yeah,
So a kid with their
yeah.
Spolkies. I mean, I imagine a lot of our listeners can relate to that. I think there's a lot of adults with their Spolkies out there who can't sit still
Yeah,
because there's
especially
actually
with a supercomputer in our pockets.
no kidding, right? So there's actually something very human about it actually being difficult to fully connect with ourselves and fully connect to the now. I love knowing that about that book, The Power of Now. And man,
Yeah.
how many people has Eckhart Tolle done that for? It's
Oh
so
my
awesome.
gosh.
So grateful for that, man. But yeah, so maybe let's explore that a little bit around there's so much wisdom to slowing down and reconnecting. At the same time, it's almost as if it's been a necessary stage for us as a species, and certainly we go through this as individuals, to disconnect for a while, like there's like because there's something that's hard and intense about being fully connected. We have to kind of become ready for it. Do you relate to that in your personal journey?
Yeah. To me, I mean, speed or moving fast isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like what we like to say at Downshift is like, how can we upshift consciously from a place of intention? But if I got the question, I think there's a lot of reasons why it's become really hard to slow down in our culture.
Yeah.
I
What do you
think
think
for
those reasons are?
Yeah, and I would say it also, like, I think not only is it hard to slow down, which I'll get into, it also feels like the world is speeding up,
Mhm.
right? So if you look at, let's just take technology for example, because we work with not predominantly knowledge workers and creatives at Downshift, and so if we just take those who we support, what's happened is like work has just been a 24/7 endeavor. Email, Slack, social media. It's this idea of always being connected. So I think that's a really big aspect of it. So like really hard to slow down when you're always kind of plugged in. I also think with social media, there's been, the ability to compare yourselves with other people's highlight reels becomes more real. So I think there's a greater sense of like, and I don't think enough people talk about this, but an amplification of envy, largely driven by not enoughness. So I think that also fuels us as well. And kind of like we're falling behind, we got to catch up. And then I just think there are certain types of people that are wired to want to go fast and to make it really hard to slow down because it's a lot easier to just keep on going than having to come back to the self. And so it's just a confluence of factors, honestly. And the world is getting just quickly, the world's getting more complex, like, that word VUCA, right? Volatile, uncertain,
Mhm.
complex, and, what's the A stands for? Uh, I'm drawing a blank, but basically it's this confluence of factors where, just look at what's happening in the world and it seems like every day there's something really significant that's happening.
Yeah, no doubt. And we're more, like, in tune with, it's on the news constantly, and we're more, like, connected to all the crazy things that are happening. So I think, yeah, you make a really important, valid point that we're living in a time where, uh, acceleration upon acceleration seems to have been the norm for a while, and now it's like it's kinda hitting this, like, exponential part of the curve.
Yeah, if
And
you
I guess I'm
just
curious
quickly,
about. Okay.
just quickly, I
Yeah.
just over the summer when I was in Copenhagen, I stumbled across a book called Less is More. I forget who wrote it, but
Mm,
it looks at GDP growth and then it layers on resource extraction, and
mm,
basically they're both on the same exact like exponential curve.
mhm.
So it's like, it's no wonder if you just look at output and extraction of resources, like it's accelerating. And which is why we're
Yep.
seeing the world in the state that it is, I believe.
Yeah. Okay, so, well, yeah, I agree 100% with that observation. So, maybe I'll take a shot at articulating there was sort of, maybe I'll take a shot at answering my own question and see also how it lands for you
Yeah, I would
around
love to
this,
hear it.
like, this piece that comes up for me around why is it difficult to slow down and connect. And I think you've given some really great answers there in terms of just like, well, hey, first let's acknowledge the context that we're all in. And like, so yeah, with this context, Of course it's difficult. And then I think there's a deeper layer there that like I look through the lens. I like, as you know, I like to look through the lens of the empowered creator mindset. If we see ourselves and each other as empowered creators of these trends, like we're doing it for some reason. Why? What maybe it's a reason that we're not fully conscious of, but like how is it benefiting us to be going so fast? And so you could answer that on so many different levels, right? Like GDP growth, that's one of them on a very practical level. Obviously, like that's something that, we as human beings on the earth have been very focused on for some time. And it's helped us, lift a lot of people out of poverty, et cetera. And now we're getting to a stage as a collective where we're like, but okay, wait, there like this seems to not just be the solution on its own. Like there's a lot of also these costs. And like, yeah, part of that is like, oh my gosh, we're totally destroying the earth and we're sort of also destroying ourselves, not sort of, we are, as we, right? Because we're a part of the earth. And so we're doing to ourselves the same thing that we're doing to the earth. And I guess there's a layer that I see in that, which is that part of the way that moving fast serves us temporarily is it's a distraction from facing the ways that we are out of alignment with our deeper truth, facing the ways that we're out of alignment with some more natural state of wholeness or completion, right? We've sort of divided ourselves up and it would just sort of, I would imagine that a lot, if you like look back to that graph of GDP growth and resource extraction, I imagine you could probably also map on like a social measure of how separate people feel. Like how much of a separate individual like do you feel and in terms of with from other people and also separate from life, from source, from the earth, all these other pieces. So I think also what happens is that the reality is that we are complex beings, and no matter how blessed our upbringing has been, when we fully slow down and connect to ourselves, we're going to encounter some amount of pain and hurt, discomfort, trauma, etc. That might be our own, it might be specific to our lives, or could be something that we've inherited, right? Like the research is really robust now showing 7 generations at least of how
Ep-
far epigenetic.
Epigenetics. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Of how far that trauma cascades down generation to generation. So I wonder how much of, on a psychological level, the reason it's hard to slow down is because when we slow down, we have to fully face and be with ourselves.
I think I mean, that's what I mean, I've realized that through the work that I do in my one-on-one coaching, but that's been reinforced in this program. I remember I got an email from a gentleman that's in the program, now, but he had sent me an email, I wanna say back in April, and he said, "Hey, Schlaf, I just want to let you know how much I appreciate what you're building with Downshift, and I so want to be a part of this program, but I have to admit to you, I'm fucking scared
Hmm.
because
Yeah,
I don't know what I'm gonna find."
exactly. Yeah.
And he's in the program and now in our fall cohort that wraps up this weekend, but like it's scary because you're right. You like inevitably when you connect to self, you're gonna hit some things that, they might scare you or you might be ashamed of or what have you. For me, like in my own journey with meditation, the first thing I had to confront was my addiction, and that was the thing life was just, like, putting it right in front of my face to look at, and every day I had to, like, go to my seat and be like, "Well, why do you feel like shit today when you're on the cushion?" Well, it's like,
Hmm.
"'Cause I had 5 beers and I, smoked to go to bed last night."
Mhm.
And then
So
2
so
days
alcohol
later,
and
it was
cannabis, was that your
mainly
the thrust of your
mainly
addiction? Mainly
cannabis,
cannabis. Mhm.
but I was also prescribed Adderall and, But the point is then I had to actually like confront this. I couldn't hide when I was slowing down to not like I wanted to look at it, but life didn't give me a choice.
Mhm. Mhm. So if you could summarize then, what was the this might be a difficult question to answer, but how would you summarize what was it that you were running from with that addiction and maybe with the pattern of always moving fast and achieving? What was the thing underneath all of that that was driving it?
Yeah. For me, it was almost like it was masking the pressure.
Hmm.
It was masking a lot of pain from childhood. So it was to start, it was masking a lot of pain from childhood. And then it was masking a lot of the pressure that I was feeling where I almost like at the end of every day, sometimes in the morning before I would go to work, if I'm being honest, I've written about this. It's like I had to take the edge off because like at the time, consciously, I wasn't aware of it, but it was big, and it was the only way in which I could take that edge off.
Hmm. Yeah. So coping, it sounds like cope with a combination of unprocessed pain from childhood and a high pressurized life that was also maybe in part a reaction to that unprocessed childhood pain. Would you say that is also
Yeah,
accurate? That
absolutely. And the thing that I've come to appreciate is and this talks about like soul work. But if you look at who I am, or I look at who I am, I studied accounting and finance in college. I was like in corporate finance at Microsoft in spreadsheets and PowerPoint. And then, and I did really well in all these roles, but I always could feel like something like I never felt like I belonged. And it wasn't because I wasn't gifted in math or just didn't feel like I fit. And so to me, it was like almost like the deeper I went down that path that was against my true nature, which I've begun to express. It's almost like I had to numb myself even more and more, and the grips of the addiction were almost getting like tighter and tighter until I looked at it, and then, within a year after learning meditation, I went to a boot camp with Reboot with Jerry, and I came home from it and said to my wife, "I think I wanna be a coach." And in the following year, I'm at the height of my VC business. I'm meditating every day. I'm like calling up former colleagues that had become coaches. How'd you become a coach? Tell me about it. Nobody in the venture business knew this. And then, sure enough, in 2017, the beginning of 2017, almost 8 years ago, I walked in and resigned. And instantly it was like, well, what are you going to do? Part of my ego was like, oh, you're going to continue to invest, but deep down inside, there was this like soul whisper of like, you're going to go coach. Like, this is what you feel called to do, which is what I did.
yeah, beautiful. So and then earlier you said something like life didn't give you a choice as far as eventually slowing down, eventually facing those deeper I say misalignments, but it's also just like it's actually just story, like the story of um not belonging. Were those the words that you used?
Yeah. Yeah. It just, it's not like it just didn't fit. Like
Uh-huh.
you could call it a misalignment. I think,
Yeah.
that there was incoherence for sure.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is despite the misalignment, like, I mean, from the outside looking in, I was at
You
the
were
top of
super
my
successful.
yeah,
Totally. Yeah.
yeah.
But so then when you say that life didn't give you a choice, are you referring to like uh the addiction and basically like the pain of it, like eventually just got
Yeah.
big enough that
Yeah.
you had to make a change?
Yeah, yeah, I couldn't ignore it anymore.
Uh-huh.
Right? It's like, what's his name? Who I love, Dr. James Hollis, in his writing, he'll call it like the hour of the wolf. I was living in my apartment in Fort Greene, Brooklyn. My wife would be sound asleep, and I would be up at like 3 a.m. with like anxiety and fear and how am I even gonna tell Eliza what I'm experiencing? I'm too afraid. Um, what like, is this gonna blow my life up? Like, fucking fear, but knowing that, like, I have this whole saying that life shows you what you need to focus on if you're willing to open your eyes and open your heart. And that part time in my life, it was like, this is the task of life. Like, you have to face you're gonna kill yourself if something's gonna happen if you don't face this.
Yeah, I can 100% relate. I think actually so many people can, and I appreciate you for going there and just laying
Yeah,
it out in that
yeah.
specific, you know, raw detail. Like I can imagine you at 3 a.m. awake in that apartment. I can like feel into exactly what that moment is like, having had my own versions of it. And I think that's like actually such an under talked about part of this journey of waking up, expanding our consciousness, connecting to soul. It's like, you know, for the vast majority of us, I think it gets pretty fucking gnarly before we realize that we can't ignore it anymore. That our numbing strategies just pale in comparison to the force of that message from life that like, yeah, you gotta actually listen and you gotta actually connect.
Yeah, and I was fortunate in a lot of ways that I was in a time of my life where I didn't have kids.
Mhm. Mhm.
Because it sort of removed the complexity
Mhm.
that allowed me to, like, just really focus on my health and my relationship at the time,
Totally.
and, that was a blessing, but I mean, that was 10 years ago. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
coming up on 10 years sobriety, but, like, really, I learned meditation, 10 and a half years ago. So, like,
Mm.
I've come a long
Mhm.
way since those days.
Yeah.
And what I would say, which I think you can appreciate, is like, even on the other side of it, like once I got to the other side of sobriety, starting to go to AA meetings and and just like clean myself up, as Ken Wilber would say, um, it's not like it got easier, right? Because then I'm taking away all the things that numbed me, and then I had to actually face the sort of the deeper pains, the deeper traumas. And I would say that, like, in some ways, the good news is that it's like kind of see it as like a cycle where it's like kind of like something will come up, and life is going to show you what you have to go and deal with, and then and then it's there might be a period of after you dealt with it where there's maybe some enlightenment or some lightness and energy, and then the next one's just right behind it. And so, it
Totally.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's intelligent in that way.
That's it. That's it, man. Yeah, and learning to embrace that is so important and yeah, it can be quite a challenge. Like especially I think in those early stages I was smiling over here just listening to you say that because I just facilitated a plant medicine ceremony this weekend here in Colorado, and one of my participants was sharing about they had a harder journey this weekend. It was a difficult one. It was one where they had to really uh, face face some challenging stuff, and there was this sentiment of like, well, wait, what happened? Like I've had prior journeys that have been so enlightening and so uplifting, and I've healed these layers of trauma, and I'm just like, you know, once as we heal, actually, we actually develop the capacity to go even deeper. And sometimes that means that it hurts and it gets harder or feels that way for a while. Like it gets harder before it gets easier because we start to fully face and we start the more capacity we build, actually the more that we face those things that were even more deeply buried. And that's tough. That's tough
Mm.
work.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's almost I don't like to say it's funny because this is it can be serious, but I just turned 45 a few months ago. And now when I have these experiences, it's almost like, okay, here it is again.
You've learned to
Like,
embrace it. You've learned to
this
kind
might
of
be a new
laugh at yourself.
this might be
Yeah.
a new flavor of it or an old pattern that I thought I had dealt, but it's like, okay, here
Here
and
we
with
go
enough
playing again.
age, it's
Yeah.
and enough seated practice, you start to see you start to see the illusion, as so many people call it, which is now where I'm at. It's just like I open up Twitter and I just noticed these mind games the other day, and I'm just like, I'm not dealing with this. Like, meaning not Twitter, like the mind games. I just see the way in which it just activated my ego. And
Yeah.
it's just like, okay, I see you.
Yeah.
Not today.
Yeah.
Not today.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
almost like laugh at it lovingly, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah, well, absolutely, and I mean, I think that's what's on that's what's on the other side of the hard work, of, like, the gut check of, like, "Oh, man, okay, really? More of this again? More again? Oh my god, I thought I was done. Nope." Like, "Ha ha." Yeah, and then enough of that, and you start to kinda catch on, and you're like, "Okay, yeah, it's not about being done." There is no done. There's just now and what's here now, and how smoothly and quickly can I just come back to presence and embracing of what's here now.
Exactly. And I see this, and I'm starting to see it now with, same goes for identity.
Yeah, yeah,
Where, like, holding the identity a lot lighter than I used to, knowing how fluid and porous these are, and, like, seeing that this might be a moment in my life of, like, an expression of myself, but it's not me forever, and also seeing, like, how past identities that had a lot of energy and a lot of rigidity and solidity, um how those guys aren't here anymore, and what they had to endure or what I had to endure to be able to, like, let them melt and fall away. And so I kind of see the same thing now with identities, where it's like, oh, this is who I think I am, and then life shows me so many ways in which I'm not that, or I am that, and the complete opposite. And so I just try to sit with it all.
yeah. Well, that might be a beautiful segue for us to talk a little bit more about soul,
Mm,
because I know soul work has been a big part of this journey of the past year for you.
mm.
I've had the pleasure of getting to support you in that journey to some extent, and soul, as you know, it provides a kind of different lens on identity, a different kind of way of defining who we are, where the ego layer identities might be more like, I am founder of Downshift, or I am, Steve Schlafman, the venture capitalist. I am the guy who has, mm, you know, 87,000 Twitter followers. But then soul has this kind of different way of answering that question of who am I? And I know you're very much in this exploration and it's an ongoing one for you, but I would love to invite you to share, like, how has that lens and that journey been impacting how you relate to the question of who you are?
Hmm. Wow, that's a beautiful question. It's interesting because what's coming up for me as I feel into that question is a story, which is about 4 years ago. I was coaching executives, predominantly venture-backed founders and VCs, general partners, managing directors. And I started having people reach out to me. um, founders, leaders about helping them through transition. And I started it just kind of happened naturally, organically. And so I started, yeah, this sounds rad. And so I helped, a few people through that. And, it was always a small little part of my practice. It was like, I coach founders, I coach investors, and third bullet, leaders in transition. And the more I did this work, the more I just felt myself like fully expand. And it was what I was writing about publicly, what I and at a certain point, I used to work with this coach, Josh Kalpow. He's a clinical psychologist, amazing, amazing guy. And I said to him, "Hey, I think I'm going to just like pivot my entire practice and focus on working with leaders that are in transition." He's like, like, you're gonna go and just do," and I was like, "Yeah." And literally the next week, and it was like going back to like this expression of soul, right? It was just this like inner knowing that this is what I felt called to do, was, help, and not just in the liminal zone, but even the ending and the new beginning as well. And it was just something that I just have felt so called to. And to me, it was not just the support, but also the creative expression. Like, I kinda see this as a creative expression, both in, the way that my coaching has showed up, as well as, like, my writing. And a lot of the theme is around this notion of slowing down during these times of transition and transformation. And as you said, like, I'm still, like, figuring out what that actually is gonna what shape it's gonna take.
Yeah. But what's really clear from just hearing you say what you just said is there's a very distinct feeling that you
Oh, there
have when you're in
yeah.
touch with it.
Yeah, here's how I would describe it. It's very similar to, like, Downshift, like the story I told earlier in the conversation, where there's no business plans, there's no financial models, there's no whiteboard sessions. It's just there's a knowing. And even on the other side of the knowing, there's a trust.
Yeah. It's like a
And
knowing on a level that's different from rational.
it's not. It's you
It's
just
embodied.
it's fully embodied. And
Yeah.
and that's how this journey has been, even to coach, from venture to coaching, to then executive coaching, to the transition guiding or coaching, whatever we want to call it. And I just continue to, we've talked about this, the Stafford, it's like continue to follow that thread and not necessarily know where it's taking me, but know that it's like I'm holding it right
You know
now.
what it feels like to hold it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah, and so I very much feel like I'm holding it. I'm working with a really gifted Hakomi therapist right now. Really, really incredible practitioner, and I said to her the other day, it's like, I never I don't feel like this has been a rational decision, like, to follow this path of, like, now, which is becoming a deeply spiritual path, soulful path. I didn't choose this. I just have been following something deep inside of me that has called me to this, to each step, and I mean that. I really do mean it.
What a great answer. I mean, I think that right there explains why it's easier to remain unattached to it from an ego standpoint because like it didn't emerge from the ego. So there's less need to be right about it. It emerged through this actually just a way of being, of attunement to yourself and having done enough work to understand what it feels like to be in touch with your knowing, understand what kind of specific map of somatics and energetics does that relate to in your particular body, right? Like that, let's not skip over that. Like that takes work to to
Yeah,
develop, and then yeah.
years of it, years, and
Hmm.
it was there when I was younger, with the
Of
hindsight of
course,
looking back.
but you weren't necessarily aware yet of what it
No,
meant. Yeah,
no,
yeah. So,
yeah,
but then to fall into that, then to not fall into, but to work yourself to gain that level of awareness and attunement, and then also build the level of trust and courage to follow it. Then it just becomes this emergent thing where you just get to keep following the thread. And so it's not about proving yourself or, having the right identity that you think that your mind imagines is going to create the, XYZ circumstances that you make up are going to make you feel the way you want to feel. It's like, no, you're already feeling the way you want to feel, holding that thread.
yeah, yeah. The other thing that's happening to me is like, yes, I'm still on social, but I post a fraction of. I mean, there's just like at this point in my life, it's like I like to share the things that I'm working on, but I'm not out there trying to build my audience. It's just there's just a trust that, like, if I keep on just putting myself out there, keep on following this thread, like, I don't have to be on social media stressing myself out. Like, I can just do it in my own way. I there was a moment earlier this year where actually this was like 3 years ago when I made the decision to go all in on transition coaching. And I had, I'd been on a call with a client that the day before. I'm like, "Okay, I'm firing all my" I shit you not, I'm firing all my clients, every single one are firing, graduating, because there are all these executives and investors. And there's a part of me like, "Oh my god, I only have 3 clients, like, how am I gonna make this" yeah, "How am I gonna make this work?" And I'm on a call, and I'm, like, explaining to him, "Hey, like, look, I'm gonna move on, like, I'm pivoting my practice. I hope we can continue to work together. I'll work with you on the transition. It's not like we have to end immediately." And he's, like, obviously very supportive and understanding. And I get off the Zoom and I go into my email, and I had an email from a prospective client that was in transition before I even announced anything to the world. And like in in those words, and I'm not even exaggerating. And in that moment, it was like, okay, this is exactly what's meant to happen. This is exactly like this is, and then there's that trusting. And I think like what happens is when we start to connect to soul and, slow down, it like kind of opens up. It's similar to like what I experienced. It's my Soulcraft immersion. It's like it opens up the senses. It like if, my colleague Andy uses, like, we're tuning forks, like, that's the analogy he uses, or like we're a giant antennas. But if we're frenetic and we're not slow, like, the signals that are getting into that antenna aren't high quality, and we can't filter it. Whereas, like, when we're actually in tune with this stuff, the antenna allow we can actually see so much more of what the universe is giving. And then we, it becomes almost like this dynamic interplay between, between the environment and ourselves.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, we get to let ourselves be guided
Yeah, that's a
by,
great way to say it.
yeah, by intelligence far beyond our own. And it sounds, I imagine to some, I know for many people, and for myself too, at a point in my previous journey, that um that kind of stuff just sounds so woo woo, or so like kind of like, you know, it's like, wait, like that doesn't make any sense. And it's, yeah, I've like learned to balance that as like, it doesn't make any sense when you are solely operating from the place of rational, logical thinking mind. And when you're solely identified with that, as that is who I am, as I am my thoughts and I am my logical thinking mind, Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. And not only does it not make sense, it's incredibly threatening to your to your sense of identity and who
Yeah.
you are and how you navigate the world. So that's part of what makes the journey of waking up challenging because you get to be confronted on those ways that you're narrowing the truth of who you really are before you get to expand into that deeper settling into the acknowledgement of the wholeness and the completion, much bigger spectrum of who you really are and actually already always have been. But that's when I think you start to find your tuning forkness.
Yeah, and as I'm listening to you, I can't help but think of the 4 windows of knowing,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Feeling,
Beautiful.
imagining, sensing, and thinking, right?
Uh-huh.
Thinking is just one domain of
Just one out of four.
experience.
Yeah.
And I think back, this is a funny I think it's a funny story, but this was in, around the time I got sober. My dear friend Jonathan Basker, who's an incredible coach, has been through the CLG, school the School of Hard Knocks,
That's right.
and, I'm out to this, like, super this is when I was a VC, out to this, like, super bougie breakfast at Balthazar in Soho, and Basker's just like, "Where do you feel that in your body?" And I just said, "Get the fuck out of here."
Yeah.
And I was like, "I'm not answering that, like, get out of
Yeah.
here." And like it's and look at me now and really that I use that story is that it's so easy because I was in that position where I dismissed that that feeling and that sensing. I think I've always had a decent appreciation of the imagination, but when you're able to open up these 4 windows of knowing, it just it develop your relationship with the world just dramatically changes,
It's a whole new world. Like, the world
it's
you experience dramatically changes.
it's like it's like it's beyond three-dimensional, right?
Yeah.
It
You
it
turn the color
almost
on. It
it's
goes from black and white to color.
it feels like a sixth sense, and
Yeah.
so yeah, and yeah, it's been a wild journey from a hyper rationalist to now someone that is yeah, that is opening those 4 windows. And I think like my dream is as I go deeper into this work is like how can I bring it to more and more people?
Mhm. Well, you're so wonderfully well positioned to do that because of the journey you've had and because of how thoroughly you existed in that other reality for a while,
Yeah.
right? Like, having been that guy who scoffs at that question, like, and then gone on your journey to where you are now, like, you're so well equipped to meet that person where they are.
Yes. And I will say, because it's something that came up yesterday, there was a tweet that went around, this guy, Sasha, and then Johnny retweeted it, Johnny Miller, our mutual friend, something about, Johnny wrote, a coaching company that accelerates kind of like the midlife crisis, sort of identity raveling would be a huge opportunity. And over here, I'm thinking at first my ego was like, "Oh, that's what downshift is doing. Yeah, that's what downshift is doing." And then I let it I sat with it. And this touches on your point about being well positioned. Um to me, I think there's a real responsibility. There's an ethical responsibility to doing this work. And I don't believe it is work that can be really brought to the masses because I don't think it's something that can be catalyzed and scaled. I think it's something that can be supported,
Mm, yeah. Well,
if that
we're
makes sense.
it makes sense, and I'm picking up what you're putting down. I think you're making a really important point, which is that people cannot be forced to do this work.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
when you try to force or pressure someone to do this work, you're gonna have a bad time, and they're gonna have a bad time. Like, that would be trying to apply the former mindset of faster is always better to the journey of slowing down. It just like no dice. And I think the only but the other dimension that I would add to the conversation there is that there is something happening, something really meaningful happening on the collective level right now, where more and more and more and more people, like, there's another exponential curve, might even match that other one that we were talking about before, where more and more people are reaching those breaking points of like, I just can't do it anymore. I have like something has to give. Or, for some people, it doesn't like have to be that intense suffering. Sometimes it's just like, things are life is great on the surface, but like, wait, what? There's got to be more. And
Yeah,
just so,
is this all there is?
is
Yeah,
this it? Yeah, right,
yeah.
exactly. So more and more people are getting that place, which means there's more and more demand, and so then that's when you can scalability can I think definitely be achieved in this work, but it needs to be kind of attuned and responsive to the wave rather
So
than
well said.
making it happen.
Yeah, so well said. And I think for us, we want to be attuned and not we want to be. I think we are. And I think that's what excites us about the work is that we see, you know, we talk about this internally, which is, I think tech is, and I think the broader world, especially tech, is going to go through a massive reorientation with AI, and there's going to be a lot of people finding themselves in transition, and not just career transition, but I think it's going to bring up a lot of existential questions about who am I when I've been a professional that my whole identity has been built on the back of this skill that now a computer can do better than I can. And so I think there's some really big waves that are coming where I think are going to accelerate these big existential questions that people are going to be faced with.
100%. Yeah. So this work is actually more needed than ever, and it's only going to be getting more and more needed. And there's going to be more and more like, so we need downshift, and we need soulful impact. We need these all these venues for more and more people to find their way, and we need to find a way to make them of to make them available to the masses as the masses more and more wake up, while not pushing,
Mhm.
and still every step of the way meeting people where they are, and like giving that let it get honoring each person's integrity as the captain of their own ship, and the one who gets to choose, you know, how deep they're ready to go.
Yeah, so well said. I think of this and I talk about this at Downshift, which is attraction, not promotion, which is one of the 12 traditions of AA.
Oh,
Which
really?
is yeah, which is
Oh,
this
cool.
idea of attraction over promotion, in the world that we come from where, and again, we use social media, so I'm not saying we're above it, but like, with the size of my audience, like I could go run that strategy and post every day and tweet threads and really try to juice this thing. And we say it internally. It's like, I'd rather take a long-term view and not over promote over like, let's make this about attraction. And the people that
Mhm.
are ready for our work will find us when they're meant to find us.
So well said, and reminds me of that metaphor you used earlier of the sapling, or the little sprout of downshift being this the container of emergence. Wow, I love that language, by the way.
Yeah.
But you know, the thought I had was, yeah, if you tried to apply those old, and like, let's be clear, like that's the quote unquote best practice growth strategy from a tech world, social media perspective in this, but we just have to realize like we're entering into a new paradigm in a big way. and that as a collective, and that impacts everything up and down, including the way that you build the next big sustainable business. And it's and I think a lot of the paradigm shift that is happening is we are moving away from extraction towards cultivation. If you applied that old extraction strategy to your audience right now in an effort to build downshift, I think you would just kill it. Maybe it'd be like you put a bunch of fertilizer on it, maybe it would grow really fast for a little while, but then it would fall apart. Like this is different. We're talking about building, slowly building something that is really rooted and really in harmony with the interests of all stakeholders involved. And also then you can broaden that to like, this is, I think, what it really means to build like a quote unquote sustainable business. ESG and all this stuff, like even a lot of climate tech, like is just, in my view, still missing the point because we're defining sustainability still from the standpoint of seeing ourselves as separate from the environment, seeing the environment as this like collection of resources, this like bank account that we have to keep from draining out. When the paradigm shift requires us to actually drop into a relational perspective and see the environment and the rest of the world as our community, like you said at the beginning, our earth family. And then we actually build in harmony in that way and build in harmony and with all beings, win for all. Now we're talking.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. As I'm listening to you, the word that's coming up is nourish, nourish.
Yeah. Yeah.
And over the weekend, my wife and I, because we have two kids, it's very difficult for us to find time to watch TV. And we just finished the last episode of The Bear. But there was a scene in the last episode where Carm, I guess the protagonist, the chef, is it's a flashback with him and Thomas Keller, the famous chef, where Thomas is basically teaching him how to debone a chicken. And he's sort of is talking about this idea of nourishing, right? Like the idea of like being able to nourish those that come to their establishment. But then he started to extrapolate that out, like we're nourishing the farms and we're nourishing the food and the planet, and it was just a really beautiful moment in that show that I went and I shared it with the team, because at the end of the day, like that's how we have to think about it, is like how do we nourish not only those on the team so that they can go on and do great things and, express themselves at a soul level. But then how do we do that for our clients? And then those that, we have the privilege and good fortune of touching.
Beautiful. So earlier this year, you went out on a 5-day Soulcraft intensive with Animas
Yes.
Valley Institute. It was your first sort of deep dive into this world of nature-based soul initiation work. I'd love to just hear you name, what did that experience open up for you, or what did it give you that is unique compared to all the other, because you're somebody who's done a lot of work. You've done a lot of exploration, all these different modalities. I mean, you've named on on this episode already, like met so many different coaches and therapists, and so you're very well studied in this landscape. And
Mhm.
that's be great to just hear you name like what makes nature based soul initiation work unique.
There's something about being on the land, in the woods, and I can only express what my experience was, but it's almost a sense of like being home. And it's why I can go camping with a buddy with Basker, and like in 24 hours we're just immediately just drops you in. There's this sense of just being home. And it becomes such a beautiful teacher and mirror of our psyche. And that would, to me, of that five-day experience at Spirit Hollow in Vermont, was that it really became a mirror at first. I went on this wander and I found all these trees along a stream that were just twisted and contorted. And immediately I started projecting onto them, and they were twisting to get the light. And I was like, oh, how do I twist to get the light? How do I contort myself to? So what happens is then it's like, wow, nature is showing me my own psyche. And to me, that was one of the big first ahas. And like as the experience went on, um, it felt like I was just plugged into an entirely different dimension, where the inner relationship between myself and nature. I mean, there was no sense of self. It was, I was nature and nature was me. I mean,
Yeah. You're
for
home.
lack of, yeah, home.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So beautifully said.
Yeah, and I had a, to be honest, I had a pure as I think you know this, well, you do know this, a purely mystical and transpersonal experience that,
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost even when I talk about it, it's almost hard to believe that it actually happened.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Well, and that's the kind of magic that occurs when we simply make space to allow it and invite it in and let go of our, preconceived notions of what reality is or what the limits of reality are, and also preconceived notions of who we are and how we relate to the natural world, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like when we can drop in, as you're saying, and open to nature as a mirror, as a guide, as a teacher, as actually us, like just a bigger, more diverse manifestation of the very same light of life and consciousness and matter that we also are, right? And it's like, oh yeah, whoa, yeah, I am nature. I am all of this. I just simply am. And I am the consciousness that is occurring through this specific body and psyche and life circumstances. And it's both. It's like self and no self. And that's when magic happens.
Yeah. Yeah. That experience of having a vision and then seeing that vision manifested through nature the next day without doing anything is such a it was one of those moments that, not saying that I didn't believe in a higher power before, but there was this feeling of, no, and I don't say this as a way of this isn't an ego-driven comment, because it's not coming from that place, but in some ways I felt like I was channeling through my body the source, and that the source was then returning what I was channeling into the manifested.
Exactly. Yeah. There's no ego in that because we all have the capacity to do that.
Yeah, I
Like,
believe that. I
yeah.
believe that. I
And,
really
and
do.
mhm. In fact, I think it's what we're here for. And I think having that kind of experience, and of course, yeah, like you need to watch out when you have that kind of experience. That is a kind of experience that the ego is liable to attach onto and try to use to puff itself up or something like that. But when you can cut out that noise and just be with it as like, no, this doesn't make me like better than anybody else. This is just the magic that occurred and that happened when I dropped the pretense of being separate. And you know, and actually, so you said, you didn't do anything to make it happen, and I would push back on that. Like, I think actually you were doing something really important and significant by just being out there at all, and also the way that you were engaging with the land, the way that I'm sure that I know you were making offerings and allow, like, even your vulnerable naked self, I think, if I
Yes,
remember correctly,
fully naked, fully naked.
as an offering. So it's like
Yes,
there is reciprocity when we
yeah,
when we offer ourselves fully, our love, most importantly, and our grief and our longing and our joy and our ecstasy and our everything to the land, to spirit, etc. We get back what we put out there.
yeah, yeah. There was this moment, which I think I've told you, where we're sitting in council. I think this is like the second day at the retreat, and we're in council in a yurt, and in the middle of the yurt is this like circular, low table where there's like a kerosene lamp, the talking piece, some trinkets. And in the middle of the yurt, there was a caterpillar that was just, or sorry, in the middle of the table, there's a caterpillar that the entire council. So for like over an hour, there's just a caterpillar circling the table, just literally going round and round and round. And everybody in the room, you could tell, was so amused by this caterpillar that was just going around and around and around. And the talking piece gets to the facilitator for them to wrap it up, and the caterpillar steps off the platform and literally walks straight to me. And in that moment, it ends, council ends, and literally this water bottle that I'm holding up here, the caterpillar just stops right in front of this and rests. And it's just like in these moments, it just took my breath away. And I'm not even gonna sit here and try to make sense of what just happened. I'm just gonna marvel at the magic of what I just witnessed.
Absolutely. That's exactly it. And and just to offer for our listeners a little extra, we'll just say that based on some of the specifics of Steve's journey and where he was at in that moment and what was happening for him during that week, that action by the caterpillar was an incredibly profound confirmation.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
but it was one of those. It was the beginning of I mean, just many synchronicities and events that nature was throwing at me.
Mhm. Mhm.
Or
Awesome,
I
man.
was, I was, I suppose I was co-creating.
Yeah, there you go. I
Yeah,
like that better.
me too.
So maybe let's tackle in our final chunk of time here the combination of topics of fatherhood and impact.
Great.
And because when I think about slowing down and what you started this conversation with about how important that connection is, and especially as a dad, and I so relate as dad of a young child myself, um, it's so easy to overlook this, or so easy to get lost when we get lost in I think especially like people like you and I who have big outward ambitions for our work and our careers and our lives and stuff like that. Another piece I have really appreciated about soul work is how it helps me kind of pop the delusion that like a big scalable outward impact is actually better than, for example, like the momentary impact that I make with my daughter when I'm just fully present with her. And that perhaps there's like a different form of impact that ripples through the world that is less about the specific measurable external quantifiable outcomes and more about the place from within ourselves where we act, from which we act. But Just would love to hear you in closing, share anything more that you want to about those ideas.
Well, um, I've wanted to be a father for as long as I can remember. While I had a good relationship with my dad, in my teen years and certainly beyond, the early years he was definitely a missing presence in my life, and so um, initially I was like, I want to be the best dad because I want to be the dad that I never had, right? And that was really coming from a place of like vindictiveness and resentment. And I began to realize that like I want to be a great dad and that's present, not because of what I didn't have, but because I love my kids and they deserve to have a father that's around and that's present and loving and affectionate and all those beautiful things. And so for me, I'm very lucky that I have a life that gives me a lot of flexibility. Where most days, today was an exception, I'll do drop off and I'll do pickup, which effectively means I'm pretty much working from 9 to 5 and then I'm on daddy duty, and I'm a dad. Like right after this call, I'm gonna go make dinner and do bath time and put him down and maybe just maybe I'll have an hour after they go down to catch up on things or hang with my wife or read a little bit. But there's not a whole lot of space. And so I think like in a lot of ways, being a parent is just such a it's priceless. I believe it's the reason why we're here. It is soul work in a lot of ways. And, I see a responsibility and, it's not like too much responsibility, but the right level of responsibility that I can break some of these patterns that were passed to me by my parents by being present, by slowing down, by being with them. And so to me, I take this as like, my most important job. Even though I am ambitious and, do my soul's work externally, but as Jerry Colonna would say, which is, taken from a Jack Kornfield book, it's like after the enlightenment, then laundry. And this is part of the reality of life, especially when you choose to be a parent, and I personally am all for it, and I think and if anything, both and this might seem paradoxical, like, my kids make me more ambitious, and at the same time, they create the right amount of structure where if I'm truly balancing and I'm stepping into my role as a dad, I can't burn myself out. Like, I can't overwork because I have the 9 to 5 window, and so the only choice that I have, and it's a choice, is to take a really long-term view on what it is that we're creating, yet being anchored in the moment, in the present. So, knowing that I can do 9 to 5 or, 9 hours a day, even though there's, a lot of opportunity and also trusting that this is, God willing, if I have the ability to live a long life, like this is a long-term path and, there'll be plenty of time and opportunity.
Yeah. And I wholeheartedly believe that that is also how you build something that genuinely, meaningfully contributes to a better future for your daughters.
Yeah. Like the last thing I would want was like, yeah, Downshift's this really, incredible company. I've, New York Times bestseller book and, everything. But then my kids are like, well, that was never around. Yeah, wasn't going to my recitals or, apple picking with my school, and it's like, I wanna be there for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And if that were the case, that would be an indication, if you were not for them, it would be an indication that actually the consciousness from which you are building downshift is not completely rooted in what you actually want to be rooted in,
Yeah,
of calling in that new paradigm and, being in harmony holding that container for emergence. And so this is great because I think it pulls us full circle. And a good note to end on is back to that thread. And I love the Boyd Vardy quote. I don't know where I'm going, but I know exactly how to get there. I just keep following the next track. That's his words for it. Or we talked about that
Yeah.
thread and how it feels to be attached to that thread. And what I'm getting from hearing you speak and thinking about my own life too is like, yeah, those moments when I'm present, fully present with my family, feel in my body the exact same way as it feels when I'm like on this podcast interview with you right now, and like so fully aligned with my soul's gifts in the professional sphere or fully aligned with my soul's gifts in the personal sphere. It actually feels the same. It's part of the same thread. It's actually part of where we're being guided.
Yeah. Yeah. And the deeper I go into this, and this is meaning the spiritual path, soul work, I'm starting to see that, my body is a vessel for life. Just like the tree on the other side of that window is a vessel for life, just like and my kids are a vessel. They're an expression of life, and they so happen to be, relate. And so it's like, how can you not honor that, especially when it's that expression of life most closest to home?
Oh my God.
It's
Yeah. The one
yeah,
that literally came from you in a physical form. Yeah.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And
Awesome.
so
Well, go get them.
yeah,
Go,
yeah.
go have a great dinner.
Wish me luck. It'll probably be an
Yeah, right.
hour of me sitting in the pitch black, not an hour laying in the pitch black with my 2-year-old asking where her Boo Boo Bear is, and
Uh-huh.
but it
Dude,
will be, and she'll
well,
ask
I'll be
for
right there with you.
yeah, she'll be asking for tummy rubs, and I'll happily
Oh, man.
oblige.
Yeah, awesome. I love it. It's no
Uh,
it is man, yeah, parenting is no small thing. It is hard
yeah.
work. It is like the one of the, if not the most like advanced arenas for consciousness practice that there is.
Yeah, it's hard mode.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you
All
so
right,
much, brother.
brother.
This has been
Oh,
so awesome.
I feel
Yeah.
like we just scratched the surface.
I know. Well, we'll be back again sooner or later, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to reboot our podcast to get you on it because I want you in the hot seat.
There we go. I can't wait. Let me know.
All right, so much love.
Thanks,
Happy
my friend.
holidays.
Love you too. Bye. Thanks so much for tuning into this episode. If you, like me, feel passionate about this idea of redefining the way we think about impact to a bit more of a soulful orientation and what that could do for our planet, for our species, for all beings, then please, 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 I'd love to ask for your help. If you could just take a moment to subscribe on whatever platform you receive this podcast and leave, if it feels right to you, a glowing 5-star review. That will do wonders in supporting me in growing this show, attracting more amazing guests, and really bringing this movement, this exploration out into the world. Reviews and subscriptions on YouTube are particularly helpful, and whatever platform that you choose is great. Thank you so much for your time and attention. So glad you joined us here for this conversation today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.